Mark, I think we'll begin. Alan, how are you, sir?
Excellent. John Neely would join us as well.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us from Canada. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, Mark, ready when you are?
Yes, I'm actually just going to do one more mute of everyone. And then as I call your name, please go ahead and unmute yourselves when I introduce you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Genetempo. I'm a fellow with Rutgers University Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you all today to this webinar on disinformation and confronting the threat from pandemic disinformation. And we're going to be sharing quite a bit of information with you all. We have a number of presenters from law enforcement and private sector to provide some great information about this disinformation outbreak. We have, out of respect for the amount of content we're covering and for the speakers, we're going to have everyone muted in the background. So please abide by that and keep your phone muted. You do have a chat function if you'd like to send the chat to me. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to do that, and we'll address them as much as possible throughout the presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to now turn the mic over to Paul Goldenberg, Senior Fellow from Rutgers University Miller Center and a member of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Advisory Council.
Thank you very much, and special thank you to the hundreds that are joining us from across the country. I know that there are so many heroics out there that I could fill the entire day talking about the first responder community and what you've been doing out there. Just know that for those of you that are still active, which most of you on this phone call are, we are with you. We stand with you, and many of us are praying for you as well. So please continue doing what you're doing, and if there's anything that the rest of us could do to support you, know that we're there. The little cliche, there are no words that can describe every single day the acts of heroism that are taking place. And know that the public, the general public, and the people throughout North America are thinking about you every day. I'm getting so many emails and texts from people, and no, I'm not out there, and we know that you are, and know that we will continue to support you. The reason that we decided, many of us, to hold this webinar today is because there's a secondary contagion that's taking place that could be extremely harmful, not only to the general health of this nation, general health of North America as a whole. This contagion is literally referred to as disinformation. This disinformation, if it's allowed to take hold, and we don't mitigate or counter this disinformation, it could literally impact our homeland security. We have people that are pinging at us from state nations, as well as violent extremists here in the United States that are sitting in basements and in other places and thinking of ways to really cause us harm as a nation. The problem and the challenge is that many of us, while we're reacting tactically to what we need to do to save lives and save the lives of our own members from our law enforcement and intel communities, that there are some real bad actors out there that are doing everything they can to be extremely disruptive. At minimum, today, for the next hour and a half to 2 hours, we want to provide you with enough information from some of the top experts in the nation throughout North America, who are going to provide their perspective on what disinformation is, where it may be coming from, and how we need to think about mitigating and or training members of our departments. Not every police department is 30, 40,000 strong. The NYPD, state police agencies, you're large, and you will have the capabilities to at least maybe assign folks to this issue or this concern. but there's going to be the 3, 5, 10-person agencies that at minimum we want you to at least walk away today saying, I have some knowledge of this issue. I may be able to assign one of my folks to be thinking about it or addressing it in some way. Because very much like the very contagion that this nation is fighting now, we could find ourselves addressing rumors that are literally set forth to take down our infrastructure within a small, medium, or large community. So that's what this call is about today, and we were lucky enough to assemble the top folks in the nation to address that issue. So again, heartfelt thanks to all of our people out there that are doing such an amazing job. This is being co-hosted by our friends, our colleagues at the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, who have been doing a remarkable job here in New Jersey. You're all aware, New Jersey and New York we've been hit hard. Our first responders are hit hard, and these folks are working 24 hours a day. They also are tremendous thought leaders, and that's why we asked them to step up with us at this very, very tumultuous time. And they have been kind enough to take the time and provide us with some of their experts. The New Jersey State Police, same. Thank you so much. You're tremendous partners and provide thought leadership not only here but abroad as well. Our partners at the new Department of Homeland Security, particularly Brian Darrow. Thank you so much, Deputy Assistant. We're going to hear from him in a moment. He has been running across the 50 states, providing information and resources as the key person at DHS. We're going to hear in a moment from just retired 3-star chief of police from the New York City Police Department, who just left, is in charge of strategic issues for the entire department. Jack Donahue, who also has his key members of his department from the NYPD on these calls, and has been dealing with the disinformation issues that have impacted his department, and he'll talk about that also in a moment. And then finally, we'll hear from Jared Maples, our key partner, who thanks to his leadership, will be joining us and providing an opening session. We also have University of Ottawa, our partner in North America here, our North American key partner, who has a tremendous set of resources and capabilities. They are organizing and gathering tremendous resources to bear for security and public safety and first responder communities, and they are excellent partners as well. So thank you all. I'd like to now turn it over quickly to Jack Donahue to say a few words as well. Jack.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks everybody for joining this call. We've got close to 400 people on it now, and it's a pleasure to be a part of it and also to share some information. So for 32 years, I was a cop, shared my way, learning a lot. Was a 9/11 first responder and did 5 years in our intelligence area, where I set up the first cyber intelligence capacity with a grant from the federal government. Disinformation, as we know, can rapidly metastasize and cause communities otherwise trusting of their institutions to question the correctness and the course of the direction that they're taking. It's not the size of the city and where I'm from. It's obviously very large, but it's the authentic information that needs to get out from trusted sources to combat disinformation. The implications for those who are on this call, for police and sheriffs, emergency managers, first responders, and even the medical community can't be understated. So an example was on the morning of March 12th, during the pandemic, a lot of information, a lot of disinformation was being spread via the Twitter sphere about New York being, quote, closed down. And that was New York City. Very, very smart, very intelligent people, colleagues and friends of mine started making phone calls. trying to determine if that was actually a reality, that they were going to close New York City down and the bridges and the tunnels would be shut, effectively isolating Manhattan. And those phone calls that came to me and others were all as a consequence of information that was being spread on the internet. It was so important to get out the correct information that when sharing it with our intelligence sources, it required the chief of department and the police department to push out Twitter messages saying that it is false, and that was done at 4 o'clock that night. So the ability to combat, to see what's happening in the disinformation world, in the realm, is incredibly important for chiefs to know and for sheriffs to know how to react to it. So I think it's great that today's webinar is about to get those concepts out there. And for those who are listening, with the help of intelligence analysts and those that are in the that are watching what's happening online, this is a great foundation for setting up those capacities. And I really want to thank the Miller Center for putting this together. And there you go, Paul.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And just real quickly before I turn it over to Brian Darrow, we were going to be opened up by John Farmer, our former Attorney General of New Jersey here and former Chief Counsel for the 9/11 Commission, who is working with us every single day on these issues. He had to be taken away to something that really needed his attention at this time. He is the director of Rutgers University Eagleton Institute of Politics and is standing with us at the Rutgers Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience every day. I'd now like to turn it over to our partner, Brian Darrow, Deputy Assistant Secretary, Office for State and Local. Brian, the floor is yours, sir. Mark, did we lose Brian?
Bear with me 1 second. Let me make sure we have him on there.
Okay. If we lost him, I think we can bring him back. We'll bring Jared on.
Brian, can you hear us? Brian, go ahead and speak.
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. At DHS, we're taking this very seriously as well. Before I go into a couple things that we're doing, I first want to recognize our first responders for their fight for, care for, and empowering their communities. Law enforcement's continued contribution to the safety and protection of this nation is paramount, particularly during this unprecedented situation. And it's a true testament of their patriotism, courageousness, sacrifice, to name a few. And so we commend our law enforcement community, our first responders, for the incredible work that they're doing. At DHS, we started to addressing the disinformation, again, very important to our national security as we view it. We set up a work group. We know that disinformation presents a larger threat to the United States. It can certainly feed anxiety, lead to violent responses. And each day at DHS, it's our goal to proactively disseminate verifiable information that can be of assistance to the first responder community. We also have a FEMA website at FEMA.gov, and the page has been set up to distinguish between rumors and facts regarding the response to coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic. Rumors can be easily circulated within these committees, as we heard from our two previous speakers, during a crisis. So our words of advice is certainly do your part to stop the spread of disinformation. Don't believe the rumors, don't pass them along, and certainly go with trusted sources of information and facts that are up to date. And with that, Paul, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Brian. And now we're going to move on to Director Jared Maples, Director Maples of the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness.
All right, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Lima Charlie. All right, great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak to this group. If anybody needs some good stories on Chief Donahue, and we can have drinks again later on after this is all over, I've got a few. It's so important, the partnership that we're seeing out there. The group that's on this call, from the speakers, certainly the participants that I'm seeing, This is how we're going to get through it. And as Chief Donahue, as Brian Darrow just mentioned, as all the speakers are going to mention, the disinformation campaign that's out there is real, and the importance of getting accurate and timely information, the right data to make your decisions, and the right data for your citizens to protect themselves and understand what's actually going on is going to become vital to not just getting us through this immediate time of the threatening or flattening the curve, but then also as we become resilient and build from this and emerge stronger. The right information is going to be vital to that effort. Our law enforcement community, our intelligence community is really going to be the key cog in that battle. So this is a two-front war, obviously dealing with the health issues, but then also dealing with this disinformation side. Something that we've highlighted, I actually was in a press conference. I just stepped out of a press conference, so I'm in the car right now with the governor for a few minutes. So I could address this call. But one of the things that I've talked about extensively is there was an actual campaign for disinformation. One of the things that we saw very early on was a text message string that went out, and it went to a lot of very important people. As Chief Donahue mentioned, some people that were very smart, very capable, very bright. A lot of leaders were looking at that and taking some information. So our office put together a rumor advisory. First of all, an intelligence board, but then we actually morphed it into a full web page that's on there. And I know I'm sure the Miller Center will get that out to the group. But it basically goes through all the things that we're seeing from a disinformation side, not just the text message, which was essentially, hey, I got a buddy at FEMA or the military is well placed, and he's saying that the entire country is going to be shut down, for example. And that led largely to the panic that we saw early on, emptying the store shelves of toilet paper, amongst other things. That type of disinformation leads to that because people really think that that's coming. And obviously, we all know what's rolled out over the last month now in hindsight. But at the time, people were taking that seriously. And we do know that that text message had been placed there by adversaries. And that did cause and sow that discontent and panic that they sought to do. And that's something we need to combat again together in the law enforcement, intelligence, and security community to make sure that our constituents, in my case, the governor, but across the board, chief, elected officials, your private sector leaders need to be aligned and know that they should only be getting data like that, sources like that from the real legitimate organizations. In New Jersey, we set up a specific email or a web portal rather that we direct everyone to from official information perspective, whether it be the press conferences to the actual health information to the public sector interaction to what we're doing from a law enforcement perspective and an emergency management perspective. So those type of things that we're doing are important. We'd love to certainly share our wisdom, and I believe we're going to throughout the course of this webinar. To the degree that we can be partners in your efforts, consider it done. Reach out to our group, and certainly I know the Miller Center has taken such an active and leading role in this through John Farmer, Paul, Mark Genatempo, all the team there has been great with that, and we're going to continue pushing that narrative out from a state perspective and working with our federal partners. I can't say enough about our relationship with DHS, with the FBI, with my former colleagues in the intelligence community at the federal level. Those type of sources of data, and most importantly, the alignments in our assessment and the alignment in getting the right information out there is really what's going to get us through this crisis. So I'd finish up and say we're also going to talk about some of our cyber pieces. That's important to this as well. A lot of fraud cases are going to come out of this. A lot of people fraudulently using COVID or Corona in email attachments and ways to get into people's systems. We're seeing a lot of that as well in New Jersey Homeland Security. We are responsible for cybersecurity. So we have some folks from the NJ KIC, our cyber cell, are going to brief this call as well. But in totality, the data becomes and the information becomes the most important thing we can provide to the community. Again, not just to getting through the immediate crisis, but getting us out of the back end of this and becoming stronger. So with that, I'll turn it over to get to the real meat and potatoes of this, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to do this with you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thanks for joining us. We know your schedule's been absolutely insane. I'd also now like to introduce, we're going to go right into the program, a framework for false information. Graham Brookie, Director and Managing Editor at the Atlantic Council for Digital Forensic Research Lab. Graham has been a thought leader, ahead of the game, and their organization has been a tremendous go-to. Graham?
Thanks so much, Paul. And just want to echo everything that the previous speakers have said already as my video pops up. Thank you first and foremost to all the law enforcement, first responders, public safety officials that are on the call at the moment. You guys are doing a huge amount of critically important work under adverse conditions, and just want to say how thankful myself as well as the Atlantic Council are for your efforts in your local communities. As Paul said, my name's Graham Brookie. I'm the director and managing editor of the Digital Forensic Research Lab at the Atlantic Council. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Atlantic Council, it's a traditional foreign policy think tank that's located in DC. My team, well, prior to being at the DFR Lab, I was an advisor to the President's Homeland Security Advisor, as well as a strategic communications advisor at the National Security Council for a period of 4 years. So I come by this work countering disinformation. We install countering deliberately, countering disinformation honestly, and we've been at it for some time. So happy to do it from an NGO at this point, but completely understand the landscape from a public official standpoint as well. Our work is spread across 5 continents. We have teams in 5 continents, and we're dedicated to about 4 things. First and foremost, we identify, expose, and explain disinformation when and where it occurs. The mission is to promote objective fact as a foundation for democracies, create a new model of expertise, adapt for and respond to information at the speed at which it spreads. And fourth, one thing to take away from this is to create more resilience in the online information environment. We're not going to be able to eliminate all of the negative externalities or vulnerabilities that we face, but can we create more resilience against a number of those vulnerabilities so that we can kind of absorb those shocks as opposed to have to recreate the wheel every single time. And so this presentation for the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk through 3 categories of things. I am a millennial, so you'll notice that I speak in listicles like you would read on BuzzFeed. It's a habit of my age as well as my position. So we'll speak in lists that I hope are pretty easy to outline for everybody. First, we'll go through a framework, just a basic set of definitions. Second, we'll go through message, and that's building credibility and trust. And third, we'll talk about how to operationalize that from a tactical standpoint. So organizing incoming as well as networking outgoing or networking distribution for trusted messages. And you might be wondering why somebody that thinks a lot about what the Russians are doing is on a phone call with state and locals. This is not necessarily a focus of looking at foreign influence operations. I mean, the scale and scope of domestic disinformation is far greater than anything that we could face from a foreign adversary, but a lot of the lessons learned are useful in both spheres. So first and foremost, from a framework standpoint, I would be not following my own advice if I didn't say the first and only best practice in talking about public safety is pointing to the latest fact-based, publicly accountable sources. As a public safety official, you would need to be all 3. Now at the DFR Lab, we don't use the term fake news. It isn't objective. It turns out, and this won't be surprising to the vast majority of people on this call, it's not a particularly useful research term. It comes with a number of connotations and is unhelpful in crisis or high information events. The terms that we do use in deliberately communicating are misinformation and disinformation, and there's a key difference between those. First and foremost, misinformation is the spread of, or is the unintentional spread of false information. Now that's a little bit more passive, it's a little bit more pervasive. The example that some of the folks previously mentioned, the SMS text messages or the emails or the social media posts about New York City shutting down, a lot of that, it started as disinformation, which we will get to in a minute, but it spread as misinformation, which is, again, one of those messages that you get from your great aunt or a family member or a trusted person within your own information environment, within your immediate information environment, and it has a call to spread. So, hey, by the way, it says something along the lines of, hey, by the way, I just got this from my sister's husband or boyfriend or whatever, and they're a well-placed source at the Pentagon or at the Department of Homeland Security, and they say that New York City is going to shut down. Please send this to whoever needs to know. That's an example of misinformation. And again, there the spread is more passive, it's more pervasive. And then we have disinformation. And disinformation we define as the spread of false information with the intent to deceive. And so for those of you that have worked for a long time in cybersecurity, you know that attribution is the hardest component of any kind of vulnerability in cybersecurity. Same applies to the information space or the soft information space. That attribution, that proving intent to deceive, is extremely important to prove a case of disinformation. And so there again, pointing back to the example that was just mentioned about the SMS texts and shutting down New York City, that likely started as disinformation. Somebody who meant to start a prank, or somebody, more maliciously with more malicious intent, whether that's a nation state act or not. Although I should note that there is no evidence to support that. That's what disinformation is. And we can get into a glossary of terms here in a little bit, but that's how we define a number of things in our own research as we're identifying, exposing, and explaining disinformation around the world. The second component is the message and building credibility. And here, the first and best practice in building credibility is not assuming that you have it in the first place. For us at the DFR lab, we do open source research. And so whenever we put out an assessment, it reads hopefully in an interesting way, but more importantly, it shows exactly the kind of secret sauce or not so secret sauce of how we came to that assessment. And all of the source material, especially when we're looking at social media, is made available. So the whole point is to say, don't trust us because we're a foreign policy think tank that happens to be in DC. Look at all the source material for yourself if you'd like to, and then make an assessment. And there's a lot of social science that backs that up. There's a lot of social science that says that if you tell somebody that they're wrong, their most visceral chemical reaction will be to double down on the thing that they thought before, even if it is outright false. And so get around that social science by not assuming your own credibility and being as transparent about how you came to that decision as possible to help others come to that decision on their own. So first and foremost, don't assume that you have credibility in the first place. As public security officials, you're trained to brief straight and narrow. Here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's what we will communicate next. Obviously, that's another best practice. But in addressing misinformation and disinformation, we don't have to make this harder than it already is. A few points to consider. First, state what you can prove, facts and only facts. Second, no conjecture or no predicting, unless it is absolutely based in fact, and you'll be able to communicate on that in a very short order. Third, it's okay to have incomplete information, but you have to state it outright. Don't create an information vacuum in which misinformation can pour in. So if you are not briefing on a consistent basis, or if there's not an expectation around communication, then that can create an information vacuum in which others that are operating within that information environment, whether that's online users or media or whoever, can fill in that information vacuum. That's not a situation that you will find yourself in. And last, don't give the oxygen of amplification. If there's a falsehood that doesn't get that much engagement, then you have to be careful not to amplify that falsehood, because your engagement will give it more engagement in general. And so there you need to have thresholds for response. The last 2 points on don't create an information vacuum and don't give the oxygen of amplification are particularly important. Not giving any particular narrative the oxygen of amplification means that you need to be careful that you're not inadvertently giving a falsehood more traction by talking about it in the first place. The framework that we use at the DFR lab for response is pretty basic. First, you have no response. If a false narrative is reported, but it was one tweet that no other users engaged on, meaning there were no likes or retweets, then you addressing it gives it the engagement that is unearned and unwarranted. Second is case by case. If a narrative is getting some engagement, but it is particularly egregious or harmful, then respond. Or if there is a non-immediate public safety consideration that would be beneficial to respond to in the medium term, considerations there are how provably false the claims were, the audience impact of those claims, so how many people it reached, and the opportunity for affirmative messaging. I mean, if it's a low engagement narrative, but it's a useful opportunity for you to put out a message that is affirmative and necessary for other priorities, then go ahead and engage. And then the third category is absolute false narratives with high level engagements and community engagement that is significant. So if it's reaching a community that is at risk or high vulnerability, if it's getting a ton of media coverage, or if it's immediate public safety considerations that are driving your response, then obviously that's an absolute response. As a tangent to that conversation, the way that we think about this is from foreign influence operations. And so, if I see one Twitter account that's from a Cyrillic speaker or Russian speaker, and it's saying outright false things, that I probably won't engage. That medium threshold is if I see a number of conspiracy sites that are covering what our assessments are, then we might engage if it's really, really important. And if it's the New York Times, then we're going to engage for sure. So that's a little bit on message of credibility. And then the last component is the tactics. So organizing incoming and then networking distribution. And one approach to consider in addressing misinformation and disinformation is just networks of trust, right along the lines of community-oriented policing. So the definition for that, easy for you all to Google, but I'll read it outright. Community policing begins with a commitment to building trust and mutual respect between police and communities. It's critical to public safety, ensuring that all stakeholders work together to address our nation's crime challenges. When police and communities collaborate, they more effectively address underlying issues, change negative behavioral patterns, and allocate resources. I would posit to this group that applies directly to the online information environment. It's not just your beats on the ground. And so as you're applying that to the online information environment, 2 tactical steps to consider. First, organize incoming. So you want to crowdsource material. You cannot and probably should not, from a legal standpoint, be in every place where people can connect and communicate with each other. But false information can be. So you need to create mechanisms to crowdsource information about bad information, which allows you to force multiply and clearly communicate about public safety. Another thing to consider is a reporting mechanism. Making a reporting mechanism that helps crowdsource, whether that's making a hotline or an online tip box that is regularly checked but not resource intensive. And so thinking through what the steps for your own department, whether you're at a 40,000 force or a 5-person force, figuring out what's not going to be as resource intensive but is effective and regular and expected. That's organizing incoming. We'd be happy to connect offline and think through if useful to anybody that's on this call. And then the second component is network infrastructure. So creating a community network creates credibility and distribution. And there, if you're working with local faith leaders, local community leaders, local electeds, noting a trusted information environment. So folks that are seen as leaders within the community that have distribution to their own communities, those are the folks that you want to work with on incoming and outgoing. It helps crowdsource. It helps limit the amount of haystacks that you personally are looking for needles in, but also it helps coordinate that outgoing. So not having to rely on you getting on a phone or doing a media interview or doing a Facebook Live or whatever your own distribution network is, but shifting out that message through others' distribution networks helps create more trust and more credibility. Because sometimes you aren't the most trusted or seen as credible within very specific communities of interest. And so knowing where your weaknesses are in messaging is useful in creating back that trust. And that's a little bit overview. I would offer to everybody on this call that if you have any questions, if you need any more resources, we'd be happy to help, send, collaborate. And other than that, I'll turn back to Paul.
We can hear you now, Paul.
All right, thanks, Graham. Those were great recommendations, and I'll tell you what really resonates is how little sometimes we do leverage and use our faith-based leaders out there. A lot of them have organized in the recent years, particularly the last year, where attacks on faith-based institutions has become, unfortunately, too prevalent these days. So a lot of the faith-based leaders have become much more educated as it relates to security and homeland security and public safety. So they would make tremendous co-signers. Having them join you on a when and if you have to mitigate a rumor or a disinformation that's affecting your safety or the safety of your officers or the safety of your communities, please look inside that house. It'll go a long way. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker. That is Krista Valenzuela, Senior Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst from NJCIC. Thank you so much. We look forward to your presentation.
Krista, you're now.
Everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Krista Valenzuela. I'm from the NJCIC. It's the New Jersey Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Cell. We are a division within the Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Today, I'm going to be discussing a lot of the cyber threats that we've seen as the COVID-19 increase in the nation. We've also seen a lot of these different cyber threats also increase in tandem. So I'm going to go through a lot of those. As law enforcement and first responders and emergency and essential personnel, they're often targeted in these cases. Everyone is so overwhelmed. They only have so many resources, so many things to do, and these cyber threat actors know that. They capitalize on that ability to target you. You might be thinking of other things and might not be inspecting every email the way you normally would. So targeting not only those people, but also everyday citizens as well. A lot of us are now working remotely, and that's a great opportunity for these cyber threat actors to then target us in various ways that way as well. So let's see here. I can get my presentation to go. There we go. All right, so the cyber threat tactics that we're seeing right now. A lot of malicious COVID-19 websites are being registered. We've seen a huge increase in the number of websites that are COVID-19 coronavirus themed that have been registered since January, and we'll go over that. And then also just, the normal phishing scams that we see, email-based, social media-based, and there are various different tactics that they're employing in those emails as well. And then, as I mentioned before, a lot of us are working remotely now. Remote access has exponentially increased. Threat actors can now hide within that noise of all of these different remote access points that are getting into these internal networks, and then maybe they go unnoticed. They're also targeting these various VTC platforms like Zoom that everyone is using, if not only for your work, but also for your children who are learning remotely now too. And then, of course, more of the same. We're not going to see a reduction in other types of scams and threats that we've been seeing before, ransomware being one of them. We're still seeing that. Malicious websites. So since January of this year, well over 4,000 coronavirus and COVID-19 themed websites have been registered. Now, by one cybersecurity firm, they deemed at least 5% of these are malicious. Now, the problem in determining which ones are malicious is that part of that determination is by how recent that domain, that website has been registered. So it's going to be very tricky for them to determine which one of these are malicious and which ones aren't. So that number might very well be much higher. There are sites that are now promoting these fake COVID-19 antivirus programs, ironically. And if you did try to download that program, it actually downloads an information stealing malware called a Trojan. The targeting of routers. Now, there was a targeting of routers that would end up changing these web browsers to alert you to a fraudulent World Health Organization information app. So on your website, you would see this pop up for an alert that there was this app available for download. Well, if you downloaded that, again, you would then end up downloading this information stealing malware. You see a trend here. The subdomain for the Federal Health and Human Services website was actually used to redirect visitors to a document that would download malware. Again, another Trojan that's looking to steal information. When I say information stealing, that might be just data that's on your device, or it could be your username and password for various accounts. So these Trojans have various capabilities, but large in part, they're looking for your credentials for various accounts. In the NJKIC, one of our missions is to defend what's called the Garden State Network. It's the network that runs the executive branch departments and agencies. So anyone who works for those departments and agencies at the executive branch of government runs on this network. So they do work on this network. And the NJKIC is charged to defend that. So we get to see a lot of visibility into what type of scams and threats we're seeing. Well, just email-based threats that were coronavirus themed, so these phishing emails, we saw 4 times as many emails in the month of March than we did in February. Now, coronavirus, we had already known that this was going on globally in February, right? But the U.S. wasn't heavily impacted until March. But you see that even just that changeover from us being more and more impacted, that led to an increase in these phishing scams as well. So we saw 4 times as many just malicious coronavirus themed emails. So we saw many more phishing emails than that. And the tactics that are being employed, and I have a bunch of screenshots to go through, and these screenshots are from our system. So these are attempted emails that were trying to be delivered to New Jersey State employees. These were blocked by our email gateway. I'm going to caveat that and say that you all might be using various email gateways, email security gateways. Not all of these might be blocked. So you might actually get these in your inbox, and you need to be aware of that and be aware of the different tactics that are being used. Heed caution with these emails, particularly if they ask you to open a link or open an attachment or provide sensitive information. So the tactics that are being employed, extortion, impersonation of official individuals or businesses or organizations, charity. These might be fraudulent charities, or it might be people pleading for money that are in a hardship. And demand. What I mean by demand is that we have personal protective equipment that is high in demand. We are desperate for it. These threat actors know that too, and they're using that to their advantage. Like I mentioned before, we've seen a 4-time increase in the amount of coronavirus-themed emails, malicious emails that are being sent to New Jersey State employees. This graph shows that you see the heavy increase in the amount of emails that we started to see in March. What you'll also see is that on March 11th, about that time, we started to see more community spread within New Jersey. Once we see community spread, we know that, well, our numbers are going to continue to increase. This is going to be affecting us much more personally than it had been before. And then you also see around March 16th, that week, a lot of individuals in New Jersey started working from home. That also might be another indication of why you start seeing these emails getting higher and higher. Not only is it affecting us more in New Jersey, but also people are working remotely. Do they have those same protective equipment on their own devices that they do it in their work environments? So you see that right there. Additionally and similarly, once we saw that Congress was trying to pass a stimulus package, you start to see these malicious emails that have stimulus-themed information in them. And you'll see here as well, the Senate approved that stimulus package on March 26th. You see a huge spike in the amount of malicious stimulus-themed emails that were trying to be delivered to New Jersey State employees. You see a similar increase once the president signed it on March 27th. So you still see that as we start having things more in the public domain of interest to the public, these different topics, these different things that are happening around us, those cyber criminals are going to use that, know that this is part of public interest, know that we might be more than likely to open a link or open an attachment that it is going to be malicious. This is one example of an email that was attempting to be delivered. This was pretending to be the Director General of the World Health Organization. A lot of these, and you'll see, are trying to get you to open an attachment. There are various different types of files that you'll see as attachments. Some are more likely than others, and for various reasons. In this case, there was a bunch of different attachments that were included, but it makes it seem like they try to purport themselves to be somebody of authority, somebody that you know, that you recognize now. You've probably seen him on the news. And might trust that that email is legitimate when it was not. It was attempting to deliver malware. Here, like I mentioned, a plea for money. This individual claims to be terminally ill with coronavirus and is asking for money. Well, a tip-off here that this might be something malicious is that they're asking for money in Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency. If this was a legitimate request, it probably would not be requesting that. And likely though, and similarly though, even if they were requesting you to click on a link or something like that, don't do that as well. you'll probably see some themes like this. And you might see these same tactics being used on social media as well. Just because you get something from somebody that you know, an account that you know on social media, does not mean that that person sent that. Always keep that in mind. Anything you're doing on the internet, social media, email, always get to it, come to it with that kind of suspicious angle, and make sure that whatever you're receiving is legitimate before you click on any links, open attachments, or provide any information. Fake resources, like I mentioned, this one says that they have, this is fake resources for businesses and employees. So they're purporting to be somebody of that you know, an organization that you know, and they're trying to provide these resources. Businesses are obviously strapped right now, particularly small to medium-sized businesses. If they can't open their shop, they can't open their business, they can't do business, they're in a really tough place, and they might be more likely to click on something that's supposedly providing them some sort of resource and help. This one was impersonation, so along the same lines, that they purport to be somebody, an organization of authority that they know, and it's the same thing, trying to provide a resource for businesses. And then we saw here the claims for personal protective equipment. We've seen a lot of these different tactics being used. This one says, you know, we have these supplies, you have to open these attachments to find information on them, and this is malicious in nature. Again, urgent order claims to have personal protective equipment. Please find the attached. This one was actually trying to steal credentials. It wasn't trying to deliver malware, it was trying to steal user credentials or account credentials. And you'll see here these, and that these do come from New Jersey State employees. Some of these you can see which department it came from. This was to the Department of Environmental Protection, for example. And then this was for public interest. So we saw actually a lot of these. DHS put out a report from another state that they had seen these emails, and it turns out us at New Jersey had seen these as well. These were, you know, to the coronavirus today infected however many people within your state or your town, and then try to get you to open a zip attachment. Zip attachments are very common in malicious emails, and the reason for that is that a lot of these email security gateways cannot properly scan them. They usually contain some kind of documents within them, and they can't properly scan those documents for malicious content. So when they send the zip files, they're more likely to get to that end user, and then if that end user opens that zip attachment, maybe there's a Word document inside, for example, you open the Word document, enable macros, and then malware is delivered to your device. Now, as I mentioned before, we started seeing more stimulus-based phishing tactics being used. This one would be relatively obvious to somebody in New Jersey because it's very much geared towards somebody in the EU. So this was saying that you would get 10,000 euros and instructed you to then send an email, and maybe that person would say, oh, you need to send us this much, and then we can send you the rest of your stimulus package. So maybe trying to steal money from you, or do one of the things that I said before, deliver malware or steal information. Financial relief, as I mentioned, those small to medium-sized businesses in particular, individuals who cannot work remotely and are out of work. There are great targets for this because they're in a tough situation. So if you're purporting to have financial relief, that individual might be more likely to click on this link or open this attachment. Extortion. Now, this is an example of one of the emails that was sent. We've seen a variation of this for actually a couple of years now, and they really just tacked on at the end that if you don't provide me money, it's saying that they had accessed their device, they're going to send all of their contacts illicit video that they had taken from their webcam unless they pay them $4,000 in Bitcoin. And then it says at the end, we'll inject every member of your family with coronavirus. So it's just a coronavirus little twist on a tactic that we've been seeing. Remote access and remote work. Like I mentioned before, a lot of us are working remotely now. Maybe some of us are using VPN, virtual private network, to get into our work network. Maybe you're using another type of remote access capability. But this spike has been huge, greatly increasing. There have been maybe a 300% increase in New Jersey for the amount of individuals that are using VPN access to get into their work networks in the month of March. So all of those individuals are now flooding the network with VPN traffic. That means that these threat actors can do the same thing, and they can maybe hide in the noise a little bit better than they could before. There's also an increase of the use of personal devices, personal computers, to access work-related information. You might have less strict security on your home networks, and then if you are using some sort of remote access solution like a VPN to get into your work network, can you then can there be an avenue for either a threat actor or malware, for example, to get onto that work network? The targeting of video teleconferencing platforms, there has been a lot of focus on this as of late, particularly with Zoom, and I think I have a whole slide on that. So Zoom bombing is essentially VTC hijacking. So individuals are finding these Zoom meetings, gaining access to them because they're not being protected, and then in a lot of cases, we're seeing that they're showing lewd or inappropriate, racist, that type of thing. Those images or video in some cases taking over the screen. So there are ways to use these platforms more securely. We do have something on the NJKIC website to employ the best practices for using Zoom in particular, and then we'll be coming out for more on the other VTC platforms. And employing those best practices will really help secure that session, although we do recommend if there's going to be very sensitive information discussed, probably not using a virtual or video teleconferencing platform, rather. Zoom in particular also uses a substandard encryption. There's better encryption available that they could be using for these sessions. They have admitted to this, that they know that this is true, and then there was also found that these cryptographic keys were being sent through Chinese servers, they said by accident, so maybe they're fixing that issue as well. But it's something to consider additionally. Now, ransomware. Obviously, ransomware has been an issue for a number of years now. These cyber criminals, some of them have vowed to avoid healthcare facilities and systems and will not be targeting them. While we're still seeing targeting of these healthcare systems, maybe some of them aren't, but not all criminals share the same morals, and a lot of these popular ransomware variants are what's called ransomware as a service, which means that you can buy the service or rent these tools essentially to commit these ransomware attacks. So you can't control all of it, and you're still going to see these cyber criminals targeting these first responders, essential personnel, healthcare workers, law enforcement, et cetera. And you think of how strapped you are trying to get these resources out. You have a limited personnel. If you got hit with ransomware and your network is unavailable, what does that mean? What does that mean for you continuing your operations? Any of these that I've been talking about, if it limits your access to a network and you need that network to provide these services to patients, for example, what does that mean for the public health and safety? It could severely impact that. So it's absolutely something to keep considering, even though, when you think of COVID-19, the first thing that you think of is probably not cyber threats. But it's something that absolutely needs to be considered and make sure that we're still employing these best practices and reducing our risk. On the NJKIC website, cyber.nj.gov, we do have a section for COVID-19 resources. The first link you'll see is for the New Jersey government's COVID-19 information hub. Underneath that, though, there is a link to the, I believe the director had mentioned it before, the OHSP rumor control and disinformation update page. And within that, there's a whole section for cyber threats. So you can get all of our cyber information very specific to COVID-19 on that website. And again, cyber.nj.gov. This is all of our information to contact us. Our website has a plethora of information, not just on COVID-19 threats, but various threats. We have a whole section to ransomware in particular. Also provide you guidance on how to set up your home Wi-Fi router with better security and reduce your risk. There's an entire document dedicated towards teleworkers and a way that you can work remotely more securely. So there are various resources there. Please feel free to contact us. We also we have an incident reporting platform or form that you can submit incidents to us. We can assist you if you do experience a cyber incident, cyber attack. We can provide you guidance, try to work you through that incident, give you the contact information of anybody you might need to contact for resources. And that information also helps us to better inform the public and our members of the different cyber threats that are out there, hopefully to reduce cyber risk. And then if you need anything, please contact us if you have any questions, anything like that. But thank you very much for having me speak today. Appreciate it.
Krista, thank you very much. This is Mark Genetempo again. And just so everyone knows, I'm going to be sharing my email address in the chat window to everyone. So if you have any questions, if you want to get in contact with any of the presenters, please feel free to email me and I will route them to, I'll route you to them, to the appropriate presenter. We're going to be moving now, and Krista, well done. Thank you very much. And we're going to be now moving to Jerry Martin. And Jerry Martin is an intelligence analyst with the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, Intelligence and Operations Division.
Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, while I'm pulling up my slides, I want to thank all of our first responders for doing what you do. My family most certainly appreciates it. So I'm one of the intelligence analysts that's actually signed with New Jersey's Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. I started working with OHSP back in 2016, and I'm currently assigned to a team that works to counter foreign influences and activities. Prior to joining the office, I worked as a political military analyst at DIA and U.S. Africa Command, both in contracting and military roles.
We really can do is bring it home here as well from Lieutenant Glenn Mills, Burlington, Massachusetts Police Department in Massachusetts, who will discuss it now from a state and local perspective and how it could impact us state and locally and what we should be thinking about state and locally. Glenn, Lieutenant Mills, please, floor is yours.
Go ahead and unmute your phone. Glenn, you're unmuted.
Shall we move to the next speaker, Mark, until Glenn can fix the technology issue? Or
Glenn, go ahead and speak.
All right, can you hear me now?
yes, we can, Glenn.
Hear you
Thank
now.
Good. Here we go. All right, had some kind of bandwidth issue all of a sudden. Perfect timing. The great news for everyone is I'm going to be on here for a short time, just a really short talk. Can you see my screen right now?
No, you have to share your screen.
Do that again. How about that?
Looks like it's working.
Okay. Yeah, I've been talking about cybersecurity. I've been kind of looking at everyone's cameras, you know, and I can see some people are on their phones and, you know, in their houses and stuff. So I got my camera shut off. You won't see me. Just very quickly, I'm a police lieutenant, Burlington, Mass, 15 miles northwest of Boston. I was in patrol forever. Now I'm in a nice admin job. And I've been looking at social media for years and teaching on it. And I got pretty interested in disinformation and misinformation back in about 2015, 16, in the run up to the election. I saw a lot of fun things that were pretty interesting. I have notes here. If people want these resources, you can go to opensourcepolicing.org. I'm not selling anything. Everything I try to put out there is free. I have some notes on here. And I also have resources and tools that you can use like a regular police department could use. You don't have to be an intel analyst. You don't need tons and tons of training. You can actually do a lot of things in a pretty small department. My department, for example, is about 69 officers. So if we can do it, a lot of people can do it. Basically, I talk about misinformation, disinformation. I appreciate Graham talked a lot about the things that I normally talk about. I don't have to run through all of that. Krista did a great job. I feel like I'm banging my head on my desk all the time trying to explain to the public.
What do you need for the pizza?
What's that? So Krista's information, I feel like I'm telling the public all the time, watch out for scams and not open files. And no matter how much we tell people not to do that, they keep doing it. Jerry hit on a lot of points that I normally hit on. So basically, what I would like to talk about, here's some real life examples. I don't know if anyone has seen any of this in your areas. I know this is supposed to be primarily police in the tri-state area. You may want to watch around your cell phone towers right now. We haven't had major incidents here yet, but we may have had one in Massachusetts where someone was messing around with a cell phone tower. And what that's coming from is these conspiracy theories about 5G spreading the coronavirus. So England's had 3 towers that have been set on fire by people, maybe, and it's something to watch out for. And it's one of those disinformation campaigns out there right now. I believe it was yesterday, it was a humorous piece of disinformation. This was Cal Exit. So it's kind of humorous, really unsophisticated. This thing was trending on Twitter where they're talking about California separating from the rest of the country. And this was something that was actually being pushed by a lot of Iranian accounts. And a lot of people were sort of laughing at it, making fun of it. And as Graham was saying, they were actually amplifying it because it was something illegitimate, but people were making fun of it, and it actually helped amplify it to the point where it was trending on Twitter. That's an interesting real-life example. You can see these sort of QAnon-type people have been doing a lot of crazy things. For example, gargling bleach to help fight the coronavirus. You know, we're here to protect people from themselves sometimes. I think we can do a lot in regards to spreading accurate information. New York, you probably saw this today. New York says the rumors of temporary burials in the parks are completely false. It's too bad we have to actually tell people that. Here's a great conspiracy out of Europe. And if you have a chance, check out Bellingcat sometime. They go into these false stories, and you'll see it says Harlem, but that's not Harlem in New York. It's Haarlem. This grocery store, this was a hoax that people took a picture from another area, and it was from Germany, but it was spread as a panic buying thing in the Netherlands. And Bellingcat managed to figure out where it was, where the true picture came from, and they were able to debunk that. This is the type of thing that can happen in your local police department. Imagine now you're just, maybe you have a shopping mall or shopping center, and all of a sudden people in your city or town are getting this message that people are panic buying supplies. You can see how that might actually become a real problem in real life from something that's coming from, whether it's from overseas or even locally. BuzzFeed News has been keeping a pretty good run on the stories, the hoaxes, the different fake stories. Police actually spread this one, methamphetamine contaminated with COVID-19. This came from a joke that a lot of police departments were putting out, and actually you can see how it became something that people were believing, even though it started out as a joke. The Pope with coronavirus. You can see these things are pretty much happening every single day now, and you can really see how they spread in your local communities. So what I really recommend doing is just become pretty good at monitoring. You can't monitor everything. You're never going to keep up with all the information out there. But if you have a local police department, maybe in your dispatch center, there's a free tool that you can put right in dispatch like we have here. You hang it up on the wall. People can look up. And it's called TweetDeck. And it monitors Twitter. And it monitors multiple things. Anytime Burlington Police Department, this is the column that we follow. anytime someone mentions our police department, situational awareness, you can create a column just for your local news, emergency management agencies, FEMA. You can watch for specific hashtags. There's Burlington MA, that's the hashtag for Burlington, Mass. You can look for a word, like just the word Burlington. Anytime someone says Burlington, which I know you have one in New Jersey because I see it a lot up here, you'll see any mention of that. And then you could further do search for a word and then specifically by location. So this is anytime someone says Burlington within about a few miles of here. And you can also see direct messages. You can monitor. Right now, I added a column for the Mass Governor. You can monitor topics and trends. TweetDeck is a great real-time tool to monitor social media. I like Twitter a lot because it's really where a lot of other social media platforms, you're going to find they leak onto Twitter. So you can never watch all these other platforms. You can't do it unless you have a full fusion center full of analysts full-time watching Reddit, 4chan, 8chan, WhatsApp. You can go on and on and on. Telegram channels. You can't do it. So really, I just stick to quick and easy. Best bang for your free buck or whatever is to stick to Twitter and TweetDeck. And then also, you probably want to find out where the people in your community are going. So most people in the world are on Facebook, most people who are online. And your community probably has like a residence page. We have a few, like Burlington, Mass Residence Network. You probably want to get on here. And you want to, just like you have patrol officers walking around in the street being visible, you want to have officers set up specifically police profiles for public use. You set up a profile and you join your local resident pages and interact with people. Nextdoor is another great tool that you can use to reach a lot of people. I know many departments are on here. And what's nice is you can put out information and start educating the public now. So a while back, March 20th, I started seeing people talk about the National Guard in Massachusetts. Are they going to be occupying the state and all these crazy things? So I actually wrote a little short article here. I talked about misinformation, disinformation, explain going viral, and then how to respond. And tell the public, this is what you can actually do. And here's a great resource I found called infodemic.blog. And it gives advice to people how to identify misinformation and disinformation. And if you just see that resource and let people know about that, we're suggesting stop, investigate the source of that story, try to find better coverage, and then trace the source of that coverage. And tell regular people, if regular people were more well-versed on this, I think we would have a much less of a problem with this. If people, before they started forwarding something about, soldiers building camps to gather people up, maybe they check that story out before they send it to all their friends. My chief, actually, his wife received a similar message like that from one of her friends. So it is really close to home and it's all around us. So you have to be able to get people on their own to educate themselves and not fall for it as much. And I would say it's really important too, where Graham had talked about building up credibility. And I think that's important too. You have to have real credibility with people. You have to build up your networks before the crisis. You have to be really good at social media before there's a big problem, because trying to build up that network now is going to be very hard. Although people are starving for information, you'll have a little bit of an easier time if you handle it correctly, but it's very, very difficult to catch up to false information once it starts getting out. You can look at different types of resources. First Draft explains some of these types of information. You can see they have satire, misleading content, imposter. that's a really good guideline of where these pieces of information come from and how they wind up out in the Twitterverse and the social media landscape. Classic site, Snopes. I've been using this for I don't even know how long now. People used to email us, hey, I heard there were kidnappings going on in parking lots where people are trying to sell perfume and they're knocking people out. Check out Snopes and you can say, no, that's not true. Classic site, factcheck.org is another good one. Google Fact Checker. And you really have to encourage the public to use these tools. Maybe they won't believe us. As was said earlier, some people don't believe the police. They don't trust us. So you have to be able to point people to reliable sources and let them see for themselves that these stories that they're spreading are completely false. I like to use journalistic tools. The Verification Handbook is a great resource. I think reporters have been burnt enough times with false stories that they're becoming better now. You're seeing that the breaking news is not as quick to come out with crazy stories. They're actually spending a little bit more time verifying. And this resource is actually a great tool to learn about information verification and debunking false information. Again, First Draft is another great resource. AFP has a whole coronavirus verification hub. AFP Fact Check. I recommend this, and you can see a lot of stories that they've been able to check. No, you can't treat COVID-19 with garlic and more. These are excellent resources. If you want to get more advanced, you look at nonlinear hybrid warfare and sort of this foreign information. The Russians were really good at it. In Europe, they have the Hybrid Center of Excellence. And this talks a lot about those hybrid threats and things coming overseas. And like Graham said, these things are local. You may think this will never affect you. You never think that Russians are messing around with your city or town, but believe it or not, they are. So you really have to be on top of these things. And I think I'm going to make sure, I'll just a little plug for DFR Lab, where Graham came from. This is a great site as well. digitalsherlocks.org. You can go here, find a lot of great information. Hamilton dashboard. More recently has been information coming from China. They've invested big in disinformation, misinformation, where it was formerly all Russian. Now you can actually monitor some of this in real time. And you can see where some of this information is coming from overseas. You'll see things, for example, will trend on Russian Twitter accounts. They make their way into American sites like, let's say, InfoWars, Newsmax, and then from there, they can actually bounce onto bigger news networks, things like Fox News. And I've actually followed stories right from Russia, right through the ecosystem, and finding their way onto some of the cable news networks. So that's pretty much going to be my spiel. If anybody has any questions, I'll give you my email address. I have no problem helping anyone at all. My email address is G as in golf, A as in alpha, Mills, MILLS, at bpd.org. And I can send you to the link to all these different things. There are a lot of different tools you can use to check usernames, get alerts, once a day I get a whole pile of alerts in my email inbox where I can go through them and see if anything's going on with Burlington, Mass. Or the Burlington Police, how to search for people, and some of the other tools that you can look at to verify strategy that you can enact in any size police department to fight misinformation and disinformation. So hopefully I kept within my time, and I hope you all have a great day.
Grant, this is Paul Goldenberg. Again, thank you so much. That was extremely informative. It was bringing it to a state and local level. And before I bring on our next speaker, know that there are hundreds and hundreds of agencies on this call right now. And many of you stayed on. So I guess the information that was selected really did hit home, and I'm happy for that. You know, you heard the lieutenant use 4chan, 8chan. If these are things that you're not aware of, I'm not surprised. I didn't know what they were a year ago myself, but these are places where manifestos are now laid out. These are places now where people are literally egging each other on to go into houses of worship or take on police officers, etc. They have become some very, very intriguing places, and what we don't know has been used against us. It's extremely important to learn more about these sites and about these places. They have literally replaced, in some cases, the town square, and that's not a good thing. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that from our next expert, Dr. Joel Finkelstein, Director of the Network Contagion Research Institute, that will talk to us a little bit about the strategies, how do we learn more about disinformation, and maybe even what can we provide to our detectives or police officers so they can become much more participatory in I don't want to use the term investigating these events, but keeping abreast, which is going to be something even more important over the weeks and days ahead. Joel?
Well, Paul, thank you so much for having me on. As Paul said, my name is Dr. Joel Finkelstein. I'm a recent graduate from the PhD program in psychology and neuroscience from Princeton University. And I'm the director of an organization called the Network Contagion Research Institute, which acts as a public trust with a team of scientists, engineers, and investigators to track, combat, and expose hate and malicious deceit, or weaponized information, as we call it, as it grows between the virtual world and the real one, with the idea that we're seeking to act as a public trust that can monitor what's happening in the social cyber domain and help give state, local, and national law enforcement and intelligence eyes kind of in the sky, so they can see what's happening without being caught totally off guard by events that are precipitating there in close to real time. So I'm going to show you a little bit about sort of what our platform does and why we believe this approach is necessary. I'm going to talk about weaponized information that's growing around COVID-19, why I think that as law enforcement intelligence, you are first line of defense and really need to be deeply informed, to have resources to be informed about what's happening. And I'm hoping to provision some light in ways in which the NCRI can help supply those resources and be a resource to you as a public trust. So first, let me share my screen. And I think I can actually do that. Okay, let me share my screen. And I think you guys can now see my screen. So this is us. We are an organization that basically has created this pipeline. And what I'm showing you here is that we developed an approach with our chief engineer, who is the architect of one of the largest platforms in Silicon Valley. And what we realized is that we need an approach that takes data from all existing platforms, the largest and the smallest, in order to rapidly turn out contextualized and rich information in close to real time by using stacked machine learning applications that can make sense of what's happening in all of these communities and study how they're influencing each other in close to real time. And so what we've done is we've created a massive data ingestion service. And that means we're taking data from Twitter, from Reddit, from Facebook, from YouTube, from 4chan, and some of these extremist networks. And then we take all of that and we create this kind of brain over that spits out real-time intelligence on the use of code words, nasty images, and users, how they're spreading information within and between networks, how those networks are influencing each other, and major trends within those communities. And the result is that we have the capacity over the largest swath of social media that I know of to act as an observatory to queries from law enforcement and intelligence, so that we can take trends that they're seeing percolating locally and go over the entire internet to understand, where is this happening? Where is it coming from? What is the magnitude of it? These are important questions to be asking about disinformation. And our hope is to be able to provide trusted and responsible information as new modes of weaponized information are encountered at the local level. So I think that the weaponized information outbreak that we're facing in tandem with COVID-19 is unfortunately something that's very likely to get worse, and possibly it could be as dangerous as the virus itself. And one of the reasons I say this is because, you know, in the Ukraine just a few months ago, in March actually, we saw a Kremlin-based disinformation, weaponized information campaign that said that Wuhan residents were being flown into 5 towns in eastern Ukraine. Well, riots broke out. Several of the towns were burned very badly in damage. Police officers were injured terribly, and the governor of the province had to resign. Efforts to contain COVID in that region were deeply hampered by this political turmoil. And so we can see that this misinformation outbreak is going to be carrying real world and massive consequences for unpredictable modes of violence, that state actors and extremist groups are going to be capitalizing on the political instability of this environment to use weaponized information in ways that are going to cause damage here in the US and abroad. So recently my team put out a new article that we're actually premiering tomorrow in the Washington Post. This is the article is on a weaponized information outbreak. It's a case study on COVID-19, the bioweapons myth, and the Asian conspiracy myth. What we're trying to do is create a way of detecting the emergence of COVID-based misinformation on all of these different web communities, and essentially find ways to typify that. So this is the report. Can you guys see my screen? Paul, someone see the screen? I need to... I can't hear you guys. But I can assume.
Joe, we can see it. We can see it.
Okay, great. So what we did was we went to one of the more extremist platforms called 4chan, which is a platform that's close to 25 million users. And over the past few months, we wanted to see what was happening with terms like China and Chinese, the slur chink, along with the word virus. And what I'm showing you here is that as the virus began hitting, we see huge surges in the slur chink, in Chinese in China, and various other terms. So there's a rally that's going on across the extremist networks that we study about the virus itself. Now that rally, what I'm showing you here is how similar, how close in meaning 2 words are to each other. In this case, we have the slur. We're looking at ethnic hate as it's attached to the virus, right? So the slur, the N slur in virus, the word Jew in virus, and the word chink in virus. And what we can see is that as the virus emerges back in January, it really hits the news cycle, the term chink is positively associated with the term virus. Ethnic hate on this massive community is being increasingly directed towards Asians, and slightly less so with these other ethnicities. Now, this website is a source of massive disinformation for the rest of the internet. And indeed, what we can see is that the same process is happening on Twitter. Now, what I'm showing you here is the similarity of the word chink in Chinese. So we want to see how similar are Chinese and how are they spoken about versus how chinks are spoken about. And what we see on Twitter in blue is that the similarity between chink and Chinese has shot up. Chinese essentially is a stand-in now for the word chink on Twitter. That's bad, because it means that the level of ethnic hate that's rising towards Asians on one of the largest communities is becoming mainstreamed and popularized. If Chinese and chink are beginning to become identical in meaning, it means that racially motivated hate is really burgeoning in that community. So, you know, what we then did was we can use our tools to look at specific conspiracies. One of the and so here we looked up the word chink on 4chan to understand what kinds of terms are coming out with that word. And we create what's called the topic model. The topic model shows how we're like zooming in on the chink galaxy, and now we see solar systems of self-similar words or users or links that surround the idea of a chink. On 4chan, what we see is that there's a whole new cluster, whole new solar system on sneezers, and a micro invasion, the chinkening, they're calling this event, right? And Chine AIDS, right? And these terms are weaponized conspiracies about this virus being a bioweapon. This is one of the most prominent conspiracies that we're seeing. And when we look up bioweapon, we can see that the word itself is filled with all kinds of conspiracies about Chinese and Chinese citizens in the United States bringing in this bioweapon as part of an invasion in continuity with China engineering it to attack the United States. Now, what we can do is we can ask the question, this is a critical question, how do we know that this is motivated by hate and not ignorance? And the way we do that is we take this topic network on this conspiracy, and we can subtract out the hate from it by subtracting out words. So the example I would give is if I take the word king, right, and I subtract the word man, I can return the word ruler or emperor, some neutral, gender neutral term that is like a king. So if I take the bioweapon conspiracy and I subtract out the slur chink, when I remove the chink context, what's left is just a normal conversation about bioweapons. What that suggests is that the slurry racist component of this, of the racist component of the misinformation is actually weaponizing this, not the ignorance. This isn't just innocent misinformation. It's understood in the context of hate. Now, this has real world implications. The bioweapon conspiracy is growing on Twitter and it's growing on Reddit. And it's intact in both of those places as one of the largest conspiracies of xenophobia on both communities. Memes are being generated from these platforms that are being weaponized in comical ways, and attacks are starting to emerge against U.S. citizens. Whoever oversees a large or significant population based on our data, this suggests that they should be paying very close attention to the disinformation and weaponized information landscape. Last week, on April 1st, the Anti-Asians Club of New York City put out a post saying, tomorrow, my guys and I will take the effing guns and shoot at every Asian we meet in Chinatown. That's the only way we can destroy the epidemic of coronavirus in NYC. Now, luckily, we live in a country that is still a fairly civil place. But what I would submit to you is that as the virus worsens and as economic conditions become worse, it's very likely that people will be increasingly put into isolation, which is going to be very taxing psychologically. It is very logical to believe that the outlet for their animosity and hostility will be organized on social media. And so there's the capacity for the disinformation landscape with this kind of anxiety to become bad, to become kind of like a tinderbox. And these sorts of posts that we're seeing could start setting off viral insurgencies, or they could start triggering, as in the case of this Anti-Asians Club, NYC, users who are into anti-Asian attacks could begin self-organizing, or could plant false misinformation about these kinds of invasions, as we're seeing in the topic networks. So our goal is to share with you today that the NCRI has developed some very vast and unusual capabilities to be able to rapidly contextualize the kinds of myths and disinformation that travel within and between these web communities. Our goal is that when you see cryptic information, that especially stuff that looks like it's being weaponized for purposes of violence, that you have someone that you can reach out to, info@ncri.io, and we might be able to give you an immediate contextualized map of what you're looking at. So thank you guys for listening. I appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to kind of drop off to leave time for questions.
Joel, thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce our last speaker, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. We're going to ask our last speaker, and I apologize, to try to bring it down to about 5 minutes so we can have a good 12 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'd like to now introduce Peter Brady, Senior Planner for NJOHSP Risk Management, to talk about the outreach, which is really a critical aspect of what we're doing here today. Peter? Mark, do we have Peter on?
We do. Peter, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Peter. We hear you now.
Great. Let me go share my screen. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting us here to speak on the coordination efforts between the New Jersey State Police and NJOHSP. My name is Peter Brady. I work in the Risk Management Bureau of the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Today, you're going to be hearing from both Sergeant Liston of the New Jersey State Police and myself on the NJROC, NJOHSP Private Sector Information Sharing Portal. The State Police, in partnership with our office, have created a private sector portal that contains links, resources, and guidance on the COVID-19 pandemic. As this situation evolves, the New Jersey State Police and NJOHSP will continue to share up-to-date information with business owners and operators to assist them in the challenges they may encounter during this public health emergency. Businesses throughout the state who have been deemed essential are now on the front lines of this pandemic. The goal of the private sector information sharing portal is to create a platform that supplies information to the private sector and allows the private sector to make requests or ask questions on COVID-19. Ideally, the platform will be used to create a dialogue amongst the private sector to ask and also answer questions amongst themselves, or leverage NJOHSP and this New Jersey State Police partnerships and touch points throughout the state to get information, provide guidance resources. Within the portal, both NJOHSP and State Police have also uploaded numerous products. Some of these products, which both Jerry and Christina have briefed on, highlight security concerns surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Our products, once our products are disseminated, we add them to the resource section of the portal to ensure partners are aware of them immediately. The portal was launched last week to great success. Currently, we're seeing businesses utilize the portal to ask questions, get up-to-date executive orders, AG directives, and administrative orders concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. As previously mentioned, NJOHSP also has launched a COVID-19 rumor control disinformation update page on our website. You can find that at njohsp.gov. The purpose of the page is to help the public distinguish between facts, rumors, and disinformation regarding the pandemic. To close out, this private sector portal was created as a seamless information sharing platform to ask questions, gather information, and read government issued announcements. That's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Liston of the New Jersey State Police.
Thank you, Pete. Mark, you got me loud and clear?
Roger that, Sarge. This is Paul Goldenberg. Go ahead.
All right, sir, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brendan Liston. I'm a detective sergeant in New Jersey State Police's Infrastructure Protection Unit. I'm currently assigned to the New Jersey Fusion Center, Regional Operation Intelligence Center, the ROC. As the state's sole fusion center, the ROC maintains an all hazards, all threats, and all crimes mindset to include health pandemics such as COVID-19 that we're currently experiencing. In that mindset, how is the ROC supporting New Jersey law enforcement, emergency management, and private sector partners during this pandemic? Early in the planning phase, the ROC Commander Major Dan Engelhardt decided to maximize the potential of information sharing on the Homeland Security Information Network, and His and Connect sessions were created. For the law enforcement sector, we transitioned to His and Connect session designed for our Core Stat initiative along the Route 21 corridor into a statewide COVID Stat virtual command center. This portal is open 24/7 basis for all law enforcement in the state and is used as a formatted dissemination and collection platform. Firstly, the daily briefing is conducted for executive level officers from around the state. For example, this morning, 899 LE executives were briefed by Attorney General Grewal, Superintendent of the State Police Colonel Callahan, and U.S. Attorney Carpenito. Secondly, as a request for information RFI collection answer platform, which has been a huge success and a push-pull mechanism. RFIs are answered in real time and given back to the customer. The AG pushed out an RFI last week about curfew violations, and within 1 hour, almost all NJ law enforcement agencies were able to respond that the curfew was not being violated and that everybody was adhering to the executive order. Lastly, a daily LE readiness survey is done to provide a 24-hour snapshot of how PDs are being impacted by the pandemic as it unfolds. In addition to the law enforcement sharing portal, specific OEM, fire, and private sector His and Connect sessions have been created to support information sharing specific to those communities. These sharing platforms are again up and running on a 24/7 basis, and it allows these partners to leverage the ROC, Office of Emergency Management, and OHS&P personnel and products while working in a remote environment throughout the state. Lastly, the ROC is part of the National Fusion Center network comprised of 78 fusion centers. Because New York and New Jersey is a hotspot for the COVID environment nationwide, the network is leveraging the best practices that ROC, OEM, and OHSCP are implementing here in New Jersey to help them better prepare, plan, and understand the operating environment as the pandemic continues and may actually spread to their front door in the near future. We're short on time, so that concludes my comments. I'm available for any questions.
Sarge, thank you very much. This is Paul Goldenberg. We are going to open it up to questions, Q&A at this point. I want to personally thank all of the speakers on behalf of the Miller Center, the Center on Policing, the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, the New Jersey State Police, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, University of Ottawa, and the rest of our partners and speakers, the Atlantic Council, et cetera. Thank you so much. You did a fantastic job and on a much needed topic. And before we close, I do want to just, again, thank our first responder communities. Probably can't thank you enough. So we'll open it up to questions, Q&A, Mark. I'll leave the process to you.
Thank you, Paul. And we have actually two questions. One is from Ms. Christy Hugh, and it was mainly to Joel Finkelstein. And the question was, if a particular URL or a particular @ address, and the specific @ address is Anti-Asians Club NYC, has been investigated. So the question of, have accounts like @Anti-Asians Club NYC been investigated, and if so, how?
That's a great question. So let me tell you, first of all, I think there have been some open source investigations, but I'd like to share with you guys and give you some insight as to how our tools can be incisive in helping law enforcement get incisive and trusted information so that they can have insights and that they, I think, need way more than even the general public in dealing with these kinds of problems. What we'd like to do is set up a system where when that kind of information, when we have a name or a handle or an email address, we can simply look over the entire social media through our tools and through our massive database of billions of comments and use our tools to perform network discovery and topic maps over these ideas. And the idea is that then we can capture the spread of the disinformation. And I think what that gives us is it gives us the ability to listen into the magnitude and the virulence of the signal, right? And that's really, really important, because when we encounter a piece of disinformation, it's hard to know how on fire our hair should be. And so I think one of the most critical things we can do is gauge the threat of that disinformation poses. Now, there's two ways to assess that. One is to do an assessment of the disinformation ecosystem, right? How much, what I showed you on Twitter, for example, what that suggests is that Twitter is a tinderbox for anti-Asian hate and disinformation. And so depending on the network, it's quite possible that anti-Asian disinformation that's geared towards violence is something that may have a high impact. We have to know that based on the piece of disinformation and understanding its source and how widespread it is, and the environment that it is, that the environment that this information is circulating in. We have that information, we can be responsible and calibrate our responses and being able to see the battleground. Currently, we can't do that. And I think that that's something that the NCRI is really hoping to resolve. And we believe our first line of defense is our nation's law enforcement and intelligence institutions. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, this is Paul Goldenberg. I do want to follow up that you're going to have some extremely important conversations with your prosecutors, your U.S. attorneys' offices, your attorneys general's offices, because this thing we have called First Amendment, which is the tale of two cities, as wonderful as it is, there are folks out there that have put out manifestos and have put out threats in a certain fashion that may not necessarily meet the criteria as a direct threat. So that's why it's extremely important. Disinformation is disinformation, but when it comes to actual threats vis-a-vis the internet, and when and how those threats are considered as such, in many cases by vulnerable communities, that's a definite deep conversation with the legal folks. Next question.
One thing also, I shared my screen. I just wanted everyone to have my contact information, email address. If you have any questions or think about or want to have reach out directly to any of our presenters, please feel free to email me and I'll route you to the appropriate presenter that you've asked for. The only other question that we have was from colleagues of ours from the CBP, and that was whether or not, if anyone, not sure if anyone on this call, any of the presenters has it, but what about concrete information about where COVID-19 originated. And again, not sure because CDC has not put any concrete information out, but if we had something like that, and also dispelling the conspiracy that it was created in a laboratory.
Yeah, so, does one of our speakers want to take this question? If not, I'll take it. Okay. I think in closing, and if it's our last question, that again it has been something that is it's a story being told and retold on many sites around the globe, and I think that when we hear the final story from CDC and other scientists that will provide the facts as such, right now I believe that we're hearing that it in fact did not. But that it did not come from a laboratory, that it came from the markets. But again, we need to hear from credible organizations that are researching the origin of the virus, and not allow the social media sites to tell a different story that very well may lead some to make either threats or commit acts of violence against others. And that's why I think when we heard from NCRI, some of the terminology that they used, unfortunately, I think we're starting to see an uptick in threats and attacks against members of U.S. Citizens, our own people, because of where some may believe the origin came from. So with that said, if we don't have any other questions, we have Mark Genetempo's contact up there. I want to thank you all for staying with us. We will be having additional webinars in the next weeks ahead on topics that I think are critical and real time. We're also going to be addressing the emotional stress and distress of members of our FIRST community, and some best practices of other agencies out there, so we can share that the best practices and information with you. So stand by for that, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you all in the days to come. Please be safe. May your families be safe. And on behalf of our partners, we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul.